I'm looking to lose a significant amount of weight that has accumulated. I'll be 35 in July 2020, and I'm looking to drop above 60 pounds. I have no unrealistic expectations of having it gone in short order. Down that path lies illness, burnout, and the extreme end, eating disorders. So the question, how would you lay out a nutrition strategy to fuel workouts, but still provide a sufficient caloric deficit to head in the right direction? Of course, there's the obvious dichotomy of trying to lose weight and increase power production, but I'm guessing that at least some fat mass will, and he says in quotes, melt off somewhat by default based on smart choices on and off the bike. Thanks, guys. 5.2 star podcast. So we covered kind of the principles behind this and just, up above when we were talking to Ben there, but we can probably jump into this one and kind of cover more specifics.
Yeah, and I think each of us has a little bit of advice to offer.
Yeah, for sure.
It seems pretty sound too. Mm-hmm. I have 2 bits. First and foremost, understand that you're pursuing a new or at least a different lifestyle. Mm-hmm. So this isn't something you can do short term, stop doing it, and expect to just magically have everything level off.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't work that way. So everything you're changing now is going to be a change you're going to carry into pretty much every day of your life from this point forward. Mm-hmm. So just recognize you're changing things. This isn't temporary. And then secondly, be patient. This is not going to happen fast. You've already alluded to the fact that you got a good handle on that. Changes once you're in the midst of it, though. Once you start getting a little bit of progress and you think, well, I already lost 3 pounds in 1 week. I can probably do that. I can probably do 4 or 5 next week. Slow your roll. Mm-hmm. Be patient.
Yeah, super big, super key point there. It's just that it never happens quite like we want it to happen, right? It always takes time to roll out. The consistency part, I think, is huge. And you already alluded to this in this case, Greg. So, I mean, you understand it, like a sustainable approach to this. But the crash diet and like, that leads to rebounding. It's always, I find that sustainable weight loss that's done for a person that's transformative. In fact, one of our newer employees, welcome to the team, Jesse, by the way, a copywriter, he was talking about the approach that he took to losing weight and really the underlying principles he does to maintain it. And really its moderation is a big consistent principle. Mm-hmm. And doing the logical things like we talked about earlier, mm-hmm. avoiding alcohol, right? Getting dark leafy greens, lots of fiber, eating the right sort of stuff, the whole foods like we talked about before. A lot of it is pretty simple.
At this time of year too, a lot of people will be crash dieting. And what happens is although your weight goes down, you lose a good portion of muscle for how fast you're losing those calories. Your basal metabolic rate goes down. You get these urges, like you're like, I am so hungry. Mm-hmm. You binge back, you gain the weight back, but you're in a worse spot as before because you have less muscle and more fat, and your basal metabolic rate is now lower mm-hmm. Because of the lack of muscle, and then it's easier then to gain weight. Mm-hmm.
So it's a terrible cycle, and people will repeat it on an annual basis, if not more frequently.
Over and over. And every year they'll gain like 10, 15 pounds, and then 5 years go by, and you're like, whoa, I got 60 pounds to lose. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because of this, like, this is the year I'm going to do it, and you try to willpower it through. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It almost takes willpower to like not try to crash, right?
Yeah, that's real. That's what I mean. Be patient.
And that's why we've talked about this before. But I mean, if this is your goal, and we certainly don't want to make this feel like we're telling people that they should shift their body composition. This has to be your goal, mm-hmm. right? Like, this is what you want. This is just what we find to be the most helpful. One of the things is, as tempting as it is to chase a weight goal, because we get dropped on climbs and we think about power to weight, right? Mm-hmm. But think of it in terms of body composition. And that, like, I'm even thinking, like, when athletes are transitioning, like you mentioned, like swimming, you were able to do a ton of pull-ups. Then cycling, you were doing something else. I bet your body composition shifted. That's like how it works, right? It happens. And that should be something that you keep track of rather than just an overall number. It's going to be probably a healthier approach for somebody, especially if you're chasing performance.
Mm. I like what Amber says. And this is how I did last year. My body composition was great. My performance went up. I fuel my workouts, focus on high quality food, train a bunch, and my body will figure out what's the best shape and look for me.
Totally mm-hmm. does.
And it just, I don't look like some of the guys in the Tour de France.
Sure.
But I performed really well, and my body fat's at a spot. I got abs. That's good. Right? But I don't have veins in my quads, and that's okay. Yeah. I think if I would have focused the whole year only on body composition, and there's a point where, yes, you're overweight and it's unhealthy, you need to lose that and maybe focus on that. But once you get to a point where you're kind of like most of the peloton, you don't need to be the roadmap of veins in your quads. Like some people are. And I think a lot of that too is just genetics. They're just naturally vascular.
Fitness doesn't have a look. in terms of what your own fitness, what it should be, right?
Right.
Or body composition. Doesn't have a
Exactly.
look. And this, you already talked about this previously, but this is where a food journal is like so hugely important. When I started tracking things and looking at numbers, that was very, sure, the numbers were super shocking at first, realizing how much stuff I took in, but even away from numbers, just keeping track of the things that you eat, it can be so helpful. Like,
Be aware.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to quote Dotsie Bausch on this one. She brought this to my attention a long time ago, and I think it's incredibly powerful, which is using a food journal. There's a lot of ways that you can use a food journal. One is, the classic way of doing this is to track calories, and that can be really interesting just to show you, especially, looking at how much protein you're taking in, how much carbohydrate. For me, when I started working with a nutritionist and got this prescription for a total number of grams of protein to get in every day, I could not believe how little I had been taking in compared to how much I should have been. And that was pretty mind-blowing. So sometimes, you kind of assume that it's going to teach you that you need to be eating less, but you might be surprised. But using a food journal to understand, I think what's really powerful about it is it teaches you to identify old habits and what motivates them, right? So like breaking down a habit it consists of a trigger, an action, and a reward. So identifying like, when are you eating out of habit as opposed to with, intention of fueling or getting, nourishing yourself. What are the triggers for those habits? Maybe you have some really great ones that you want to keep and reinforce. And then what are the ones that you want to replace? And I wouldn't say, stop a bad habit, find something to replace it with that's incrementally better, because I think that that's just a little bit more of a sustainable approach. The other thing, and this is Dotsie's thing, which I think is really important, is with a food journal, you can start to understand how foods affect you. And you might identify that there are some like really just amazing superfoods for you. Like it's something that you really enjoy, it's satiating, it's comforting, and boy, does it ever give you energy and you feel amazing for the next 6 hours. Versus like, I've had a couple people comment on like, oh yeah, you said, if you just give your body what it needs, it'll turn into, what it needs to be for what you want to do. But my body won't do that, because if I just eat what I want, then, it's not going to turn out that well. Well, I'm not saying just eat what you want. I'm saying give your body the fuel it needs. That might not be a donut. I don't know.
Yeah.
But when you do a food journal like this, you start to realize that there might be some foods that you gravitate to out of habit or out of a craving, and you think you really want it, but then how do you feel 30 minutes later, an hour later?
I think that might be the single best use for a food journal.
Yeah, you identify foods that are your kryptonite, and then you can also identify foods that are just like superpower foods that turn you into like the best version of yourself.
Can I flip that a bit too?
Yeah.
Because I find a lot of the time, like I have a really good friend and she's like kale obsessed. She's like the kale queen, right? But she got to a point where she basically realized through tracking it all, she was like, oh wow, I'm eating so much of this now. I've gotten so obsessed with it. And when I look at it, it's not delivering the same benefit that I get when I eat a greater variety of things. Like
Right.
I feel better when I'm doing that, right? So even though like you can find something that you just think that like this is a really healthy thing and this is
Right.
what I'm going to eat a ton of, maybe it doesn't resonate with you quite as much as when you're eating something that's more balanced.
Exactly.
Like,
And everybody's different. And keep in mind, mood is actually important. So, there might be something that sounds really good that you eat and then your mood crashes an hour later. I mean, finding foods that actually taste good, that's incredibly important. It's part of feeling satisfied. It's part of just general well-being. But I promise you, if you do a food journal, you will find foods that you actually genuinely enjoy, that deliver a lot of great energy, and that are actually pretty healthful. So it's really fun to identify what really works for you. And I think it's different for individuals. So, yeah. And then the other thing you can do is, as you're modulating maybe some of changing habits or replacing habits that you don't think are that great, keeping track of how those new changes and habits are affecting you.
Yeah, absolutely. If you aren't tracking all that stuff, even the subjective stuff, like how you feel, that's super important, especially when you get into diet. We've talked about that plenty of times. Workouts then become easier, and it just changes how you feel in general, right? What else do we want to cover on this?
I just want to say, just be aware. This is what Jesse's tip is, and it's so key. And Jesse was extremely overweight, and then he's now at a healthy weight.
He's our copywriter
Yes.
you're speaking about. Yeah.
He was like, for him, he said coffee creamer. Like you can just be, that can be an extra couple 100 calories a day by putting in coffee creamer. I said this, but so nuts are healthy for you, but if you have weight to lose and you're eating like a handful of nuts, handful of nuts can be 3, 4, even 500 calories.
Very calorie dense.
Yep. One Starbucks latte. It's like, I just get one coffee in the morning. Those can be 400 to like 800 or 900 calories.
If losing weight or affecting body composition is on your agenda, Starbucks has no place in your life.
Unless it's black coffee.
Yeah.
Sure.
In which case, go somewhere where the coffee's good.
Starbucks, not a sponsor of this podcast. Thanks, Chad.
But the point is that things that we take in that we think aren't bad.
Well,
could
you don't, without that, you're not aware of them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're just like, oh, it's just a little bit of snack. And you don't realize that maybe if you're aiming for a 500 calorie deficit during the day, a couple of these things added up to 600 or 700 calories, and it could be your entire deficit.
And food journaling is a pain, but these are the things you discover.
Right.
Well,
and you don't have to journal forever. Like
No.
just long enough to start identifying some of these key things.
It's iPhone, the Notes app. Just
Yeah,
put it in
there are
there. Just
definitely
type in what
easier
you're
ways.
doing.
Yeah.
And then later on, if you want to put in MyFitnessPal, you can, but you could do it pretty quickly.
Yeah. And the other thing with this too is that, like, to your point, Amber, you can check back in every once in a while with this whole process. Like, you go years without it,
Yeah, sure.
maybe months,
Yep.
and then suddenly you just do it for a week or 2 weeks, and it's a good systems check.
Even
Yeah.
easier, just take a picture of what you eat with your phone. Bam, bam, bam. And you can look back and be like, oh, I didn't need that. I didn't need that. Didn't need that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you have to type.
Oh yeah, yeah. What else do we want to cover on this? We have plenty of notes, but we've covered kind of some of these things in a prior question here.
Just one other thing I think for Greg is the higher your fitness is, the more calories you're going to burn per hour. I remember back when my FTP was like 220. I used to look at Chad's workouts, and in an hour, Chad would be burning 1,000 calories, and I'm like, what? I'd be burning like 400 calories an hour.
Yeah.
I was like, how easy would it be to maintain good? Good body composition if you're burning 1,000 calories
And
an hour.
that's true too, but it can also steer you down the path of thinking I can get away with more than I can. So you do still have to to keep balance in mind.
Oh yeah.
I'll just reiterate what I've said before, which is to fuel the workouts, a good rule of thumb is the calories you take in before and during your workout should equal what you burn during training, and then have a good recovery drink. It doesn't have to be, 800 calories, 200-300 calories, protein and carbohydrate is enough. And then off the bike, the other meals that you're having the rest of the day, that's where you want to create your sustainable deficit. And that's where you really want to focus on nutrient density. And in those cases, so, I would focus on carbohydrate for fueling your training. And then in your nutrient dense meals off the bike, focus on just getting tons of produce, whole foods. And then that's where you really want to focus on your protein intake. And I've worked with nutritionists and a couple of physiologists on stuff with this. And one of the rules of thumb that I was told was, don't worry too much about fat. I mean, it's a really easy place to reduce caloric intake because every gram of fat is so calorie dense. But we need fat. We do. So if you're really focused on fueling your training and you're getting really good quality food in the meals off the bike and you're still getting around maybe a 500 calorie deficit on the day, don't worry so much about the fat. Just eat whatever fat is incidental to your protein intake and to your produce intake. Fat's really important for brains. So
if you're eating like the healthier foods, it becomes like you get the right amount. If you're eating the fried foods, then it can easily get to be, if you're going to McDonald's, it's easy to have too much fat. But if you're eating like salmon and salads with olive oil and stuff, unless you're doing like a cup of olive oil, it just naturally happens.
Right. Like if you're just putting some olive oil on a salad to taste, chances are it's going to be a good amount.
Yeah.
And then just, I guess with respect to getting the ball rolling, there's a motivating kind of food fitness cycle that takes shape after a little while. And it's as your fitness improves, you find yourself making better dietary choices.
Yeah.
And as your dietary choices improve, you find your fitness going up. So the two kind of feed off one another. So really, if you can just kind of ride out that initial period and get through that, maybe a sticking point you've encountered a number of times, just get to that point where you have a little momentum in one of those two areas and they start feeding off each other. You gain momentum in both those areas and you're rolling.
Cool thing is you just start to feel better. And then all of a sudden you realize that you really want to do the things that you make you feel better.
Yeah.
It becomes easier.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. Over time for sure. If you like that video, you should subscribe to our channel. There's more where that came from. And even like the video down below with a thumbs up or leave us a comment.
If you want to see race analysis videos, click right over here. And if you want to get your coaching questions answered, click over here.
And if you want to become a faster cyclist, head over to TrainerRoad.com. It works. Trust us.
Just trust us.
We guarantee it.
Oh yeah, or your money back.
It's true. Take us up on it.